We have so much news to share because we have seen the collapse of one of cycling's biggest retailers. Joe has been rubbing shoulders with the pros at the opening weekend, and Stefan has been testing the cheapest SPD power meter pedals on the market. But first, let's start with Wiggle because yes, sadly, they have now started the process of winding down their entire business, which I think is actually a really sad thing because what it's meaning is that there's a whole bunch of people that have now, sadly, lost their jobs. There's a very small team that's remaining and their job is going to be to aid in the continual trade of the business, but also the winding down of it. But yeah, I think first and foremost, we're just really sad to see the end of a company that really kind of changed the landscape of cycling retail.
Yeah, and I think particularly with the brands that it had, like DHB and Vitus, they're such accessible, like really solid brands with pretty good products across the board. Do we know anything about what's going to be happening with those at all?
We do. We've got a little bit of information. So what we know so far is that the mysterious new buyer, who we have no idea who that is, what the buyer has purchased is the intellectual property of those house brands. So DHB, Vitus, Nukeproof, all the rest of them, it's likely that we might see those brand names pop up again elsewhere. But because none of the stock that the business was holding is going to be part of that sale, we don't really know where those logos are going to show up or how they're going to be used. And we have no idea how much that IP was actually purchased for. So there's still a lot of question marks that surround the future. Happily though, it's not all doom and gloom because I saw something really funny on Instagram the other day. I saw this video of a guy who had wired up his Sram RED derailleur. It looked like he'd used a 3D printed kind of plate with wires going into it. Those wires are then go all the way to the handlebars where he's got a wind turbine powering his SRAM mech, which I just thought is hilarious.
It's quite funny, isn't it? I think, particularly at the start of the video as well, the cables look relatively neat and it just gets progressively worse and worse, doesn't it, up to the handlebars. But still, sustainability at its finest there.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the thing is, he's actually not a million miles off of something that SRAM themselves are actually trying to do. Because SRAM, back in 2020, they applied for a patent to essentially incorporate solar panels onto a bike to allow you to charge a spare Axis battery. So if one of them went flat, be that on a mech, a power meter or a dropper post, you could take the one that was charging up via the solar panel and then switch it and interchange it. So he's actually not a million miles off of something that's actually being worked on and developed by SRAM. And yeah, as we know now, that patent has now been approved. Speaking of SRAM,
yes.
You were at opening weekend and you spotted something quite interesting.
Yes, hiding in plain sight, it has to be said. Both me and Will Jones from Cycling News were out at the opening weekend. And on first inspection, we actually both missed a brand new front derailleur from SRAM. It was fitted to the bikes of the team Visma Lisa bike, men's and women's. Brand new front derailleur, almost indistinguishable from the outgoing model. So
talk us through differences, yeah.
Absolutely. So the main takeaways are a redesigned front mech cage, which is now black as well, sort of anodized black. And the front, sort of the shaping of the front derailleur is also sort of slightly more curved back. Same battery looks to be in use, so I would expect likely compatibility with your existing Axis batteries when it does release. And other than that, on the surface at least, it looks pretty similar.
Arguably though, I think the biggest thing that we'd all love to see is better front mech shifting, but that's going to be down to the motor itself that's inside.
Correct, yeah, so that we don't know yet. In fact, we don't even know if it's going to be Sram RED. As I say, there was no branding on these front derailleurs. Speaking with other World Tour mechanics as well, other SRAM-sponsored teams, very much seemed to be the case that Visma were testing these front derailleurs. So in terms of naming or indeed what the internals are going to be like, we're not sure yet. But still really positive, I think, to see that they're sort of taking a big redesigning to something that arguably was a bit of an Achilles on their previous group set.
Worth remembering though that this is obviously going to be a pre-production unit that's probably in place. So what we're seeing, obviously it's an incredibly blacked out unit. There's a chance that actually if this is a new SRAM RED front mech, there's a good chance that actually it could have a completely new look once it's properly unveiled.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, even so, I think It looked pretty clean, pretty polished, so I would imagine maybe in the next sort of few months, I think we'll see this released.
That wasn't the only thing that you guys saw though, because there was something else chain set related.
Yeah, a little bit of a trend actually, just across the world tour. So, I mean, where this all starts, we're talking about chainring sizes here. This all starts with Tobias Foss at the UAE Tour. So a couple of weeks back now, we saw him roll off the start ramp of the TT with a 68-tooth chainring, which is absolutely colossal. Now, it caused a bit of a stir online. A number of media sites reported on it, and it actually got a bit of clapback from Dan Bigham, who is a performance engineer at Ineos. And he tweeted that anyone that was confused about the gear choice should Google gear ratios. And in fairness to him, when you do that, it does all make rather a lot of sense, really. A 68-14 gear actually is about equivalent to a 54-11. And at 90 RPM, that puts you at about 55 kilometres an hour. Sure enough, the winning speed for that time trial was 55 k's an hour. So.
Oh, well, there we go. And I guess the biggest benefit they're getting there is just a perfectly straight chain line. So the drivetrain efficiency is going to be...
Yeah, much better. I think going really conservative, this can be the combination of a straighter chain line and also the chain not having to sort of bend around such a tight corner can look to gain in the region of about 1%. Which doesn't look much on the surface, but these guys for prologues like this are doing about 450 watts. So, I mean, 4 or 5 watts, we very, very roughly calculated that to be, about 0.2 of a k an hour, which over that course, you're looking at 3 seconds. And bearing in mind the podium was separated by, I think, less than 15 seconds, every little helps. And the other interesting thing we saw as well is this is absolutely spilling onto the road scene as well. So Victor Kampenaerts at Omloop, Het-Nieuwsblad and Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne was riding a 58-tooth setup on his Shimano chainrings. But that actually wasn't the biggest gear ratio we saw. That award goes to Tratnik, who he does like to grind a little bit, doesn't he? He doesn't ride the highest cadence. But yeah, his 54.10 is actually equivalent to riding a 60.11, which I thought was monster gears. But then again, the average speed for the race was over 50 k an hour, so it makes sense.
What else did you see while you were out there?
Well, on the topic of aerodynamics, actually, the other interesting sort of new grounds for development was handlebars. I think realistically, this is coming off the back of the UCI starting to crack down on turned-in lever hoods. But interestingly, I saw a number of different teams using aero cockpits that had been specifically developed for the teams. Now, a team mechanic from Intermarché Wanty explained to me that 3 of their riders were using this new 34cm wide setup and confirmed also that it had been custom made by Cube's component brand Newman. Now, the big thing here is that's really not cheap to do. So normally, whenever there's a new carbon fibre product, there's a tooling cost associated with that. So clearly, I would argue the new sort of rule changes that haven't been enforced yet are clearly providing a bit of financial incentive for teams to get narrower.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if those moulds might actually be slightly modular, so they can add in parts to that mould to elongate the stems or narrower, or kind of take parts out to allow them to make the bars narrower.
Yeah, indeed, and it's something we've reached out to a couple of brands about this to sort of try and confirm this, because Envy, for example, they do offer they offer custom handlebars, and you would imagine if they're doing that on any sort of scale that there would be some sort of cost management involved, but still quite interesting. Also, the other one was Data. Yeah. So the guys over at Decathlon AG2R Le Mondial, I saw one of them riding a 16.5cm stem on the Data Aero cockpit, which I thought was particularly large.
Talk to us about tyres, because I think there was quite a mix of different setups.
There was actually, and that's what stood out to me. Absolutely no pattern. Really interesting. The majority of teams were on 28, 30, and some on 32mm tyres. So stuff's definitely getting wider. A couple of mechanics also told me that basically allows them to not really change the bikes beyond that for the classics. Right. So maybe the days of suspension systems and changing tyre pressures and such may be sort of on the way out now, I think. But crucially, people were still riding tubs. So Liv, Jayco were using tubs, and the guys over at Little Trek as well, also using tubs. And the reason for this was really interesting. So head mechanic of Liv Jayco, Valentin Aumont, actually told me that the reason they were running tubs was for rider safety. So he said, okay, tubeless with a liner protects the rim, but it doesn't protect the rider. What he means by that is tubeless setups, as we saw with Thomas de Gendt in the UAE Tour, sometimes can have the tendency to actually fail and blow off the rim. Now with a tub, because the tyre is actually glued onto the rim, there's less chance of that happening. And more also, he did mention as well, you can keep riding them when they're flat. They rarely blow out. So in terms of, if you're racing, you get a puncture, you can keep riding until your team car gets there. That's also obviously a really big gain.
Yeah. Wow. So quite a lot of different options, especially ahead of Roubaix. Things are being tested.
Absolutely, things being tested. Also, interestingly, Visma Lease bike had the lowest pressures on the day. So they were running 30mm tyres with unreleased reserve carbon wheels, or at least some of their riders were, which the mechanic, Bart Kennis, actually mentioned. He let on to me that the new wheels might be optimised for these 30mm tyres. But they were running them with the Vittoria Airliner inserts, and they were actually running them as low as 3 bars. That's about 45 PSI for some riders.
So I hear that you've got a fancy new tool.
I do indeed. So last week I was at Corebike, which is a trade show here in the UK, and I met up with the guys from Topeak because they've always got generally quite interesting things going on, and they have come out with a digital torque wrench, which I think is pretty cool. It's a really neat little setup, to be honest. It comes with hex keys ranging from 2 to 6 millimeters. There's 4 different Torx head sizes, and there's a Phillips head in there as well. So I think it just works quite well.
Yeah, nice and compact. Yeah.
So how does it actually work? Is it sort of a specific number in terms of the torque setting, or?
I mean, think of it kind of like it's almost like the shift lights on an F1 car. So when you're torquing something up, you'd kind of get the bolt on, and then you can see the LEDs running up the screen. So when you kind of hit the number that you want to be at, it's job done. It's not the cheapest thing in the world, but torque wrenches aren't that cheap, but I think it's a really good solution that would help a lot of people out just undertake their normal day-to-day jobs and know that they've done them safely.
Potentially as well, something great for those who are going on a training camp, for example. There's nothing worse than when you haven't got a torque wrench and you're sort of just really gently doing up the bolts when the bike comes out of the bike bag. So having something that's real nice and compact to sort of make sure everything's okay would be really good for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's that type of a person that this is going to work really well for. If something of this is of interest, it's not actually out just yet. I think you can pre-order it, but then it gets properly released the first week of April, but I've left a link down in the description if you do want to go and check it out.
Next up, I believe we've got some pretty good value power meter pedals. So Stefan, tell us about them.
Yeah, so Favero, well, I think they're well known as a pretty good value power meter pedal brand all round with their Asioma road pedals, but now they've come out with set for SPD, increasing the number of SPD pedals out there on the market that sense power by 50%. There's only Garmin and SRAM that have Favero models, and they've really brought the price down to a much more accessible point, really, which is really quite impressive. And so these pedals in a single-sided option retail for $500 or £400, but I think that the best thing about these pedals is not the price, but it's really the dimensions that they offer. The Garmin Rally system is great in so many ways with the interchangeable bodies. You can, if you have a set of road pedals, for instance, you can get the body and change it to SPD, like for riding through the winter perhaps. But the issue always was that the stack height is just significantly higher than Shimano SPD pedals, and it just throws you off a little bit. And for me, I have to adjust the the height of my saddle when I swap onto Garmin Rally pedals, because it's just that much higher. And when it comes to the cornering, like with your centre of mass just raised that a little bit more, for me, I just don't really like change to what I'm used to in my setup. But with these pedals, the stack height is just that bit lower, and it just feels it's not quite the same as actual Shimano SPD pedals. It still is a little bit higher, but for me, it's completely imperceptible. And so I've been really enjoying riding these. I've been using them for all of my rides, and it's been quite nice actually using these. And on the road, on gravel and everything, it's a single set of shoes. You just jump on with the pedals. I've become a little bit of a convert really, and I've taken the road pedals off my road bike and put some non-power sensing SPDs on as well, because it's just nice and convenient really. As I
Must
said.
be nice being able to walk at the cafe, Stefan.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything else to note about these pedals? Because I think they are rechargeable.
Yeah, exactly. And so like Favero's other power meter pedals, these are rechargeable. They have a little clip that just attaches to the pedals, and these, they've got a micro USB attachment to them, and so you don't have this great big long like extra cable that you have to carry around. You can just take this little unit and then attach it to any micro USB cable that you have, which is something that's quite neat and something that I personally really like as well. The thing that I actually most like about these pedals is how the spindle actually works inside of it, or the fact that it's got a completely sealed like internal spindle, and so you can service these pedals just like any other like non-power meter sensing pedals. And the SRM, which is quite a bit more expensive, has a little port that attaches, and so that's potentially like a weak point for water ingress, and this completely obviates that. And so you can replace the spindle if you were to have any issue. That can just be straight up replaced, which is something that's really quite neat as part of these pedals as well. So I think that all round it's a very well thought out, very simple but very functional, and so far it's proving durable set of pedals. And so and the price as well, cheapest on the market. So it's thumbs up really at this point.
For this month's Bike of the Month, we have an Argon 18, and Joe, I think you've been hands-on with it. Tell us about it.
Correct, so I've had the Argon 18 Sun Pro only in the workshop so far, haven't actually ridden it, but I just think it's worth a mention because there's some really nice headline stats that I think are going to make this a really interesting bike to a lot of people. So firstly, the full Dura-Ace build with 303S zip wheels comes in at £8,500 in the UK, which, okay, it's not cheap, but that really puts it in line with some of the more sort of value brands. It's going to go toe-to-toe with bikes like the Van Rysel RCR Pro, which, again, another bike we're really interested to get our hands on. So I think that just puts it in a really interesting place in the market, as I say, for that full top-level build. Now, it is missing a one-piece carbon handlebar and stem. Currently, there's an FSA alloy setup on there. All the cables are pretty much internal, so from that point of view, the bike looks really clean. That is sort of an area, maybe if you were looking to upgrade, it's maybe the first thing you'd look to do. So the build with this alloy handlebar and stem comes in at 7.2 kilos for a size 54, which I would actually say is pretty respectable.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that, a carbon cockpit would likely save probably 100 or 200 grams anyway. Yeah. It's really in the ballpark of sort of bikes a lot more expensive than it. The other thing I'd like to mention is the build was really simple. Now, I personally think you can tell really quite a lot about a bike from how easy it was to build. I've had lots of bikes in the past where problems have arisen from exactly where you would expect them to after you've done that bike build. So I'm thinking potentially something like the old Cannondale Super 6, the 3rd generation. Just like there were parts feel a little bit finicky and it's just not quite as nicely finished, arguably, than the Mark IV that's out now. Whereas this was absolutely brilliant. The seat clamp was really clean, just no nonsense. And I think generally speaking, it just seems like a really well put together bike. One more thing on that Argon 18 as well, particularly in light of what I've seen at the opening weekend, 28mm tyres as standard.
Interesting. Let us know down below, what is your favourite tyre setup given what all the pros are doing?